Remember 2008 when everyone said the economy is fine right until it wasn't? As you lie awake checking your account balances at 2 a.m., I'm seeing those same warning signs return, and this time directly in your wallet. What's truly alarming is the data we're going to reveal in this video, which is that over 11% of credit card accounts are over 90 days delinquent, which is the highest since 2011. That's according to the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, and these figures represent millions of Americans who are struggling to meet basic financial obligations. The 12-year high in minimum payments signals widespread financial strain across households nationwide. Is this the beginning of the economic downturn that everyone's been predicting? Another fact is that more Americans are falling behind on their credit card payments now than during the COVID pandemic. That should terrify all of us. I've been tracking the Federal Reserve Bank of New York data, and what I'm seeing has my stomach in knots. Credit card delinquency rates have hit their highest level in nearly 5 years. We're talking about serious trouble brewing in millions of Americans' wallets right now. And let's break down what these numbers actually mean. When we talk about a 90-day delinquency or a 90-plus day delinquency climbing above 11%, this is the highest number it's been since 2011, and it's worse than anything we saw during the pandemic recovery. We're talking about accounts that have missed multiple payment cycles in a row, and this is what happens when people are genuinely unable to pay. At this point, their credit scores are taking massive hits, they're getting collection calls, and they're likely experiencing significant financial distress. And often, here's how the story unfolds. Tell me if it sounds familiar to you. They were managing fine until medical bills and inflation squeezed their budget. First, they cut streaming services, then they cut restaurant meals, and finally, they found themselves choosing between having to buy groceries and minimum credit card payments. Now their credit cards are maxed, and they've missed 3 consecutive payments, and the fact is, this story is playing out in millions of Americans' households across America right now, and it has in past recessions as well. Despite pandemic relief programs that once helped Americans get caught up on their debts, we've now blown past pre-pandemic delinquency levels, and if we visualize the trend line from 2019 through today, you'll notice something unsettling, and that's for about 18 months we've seen this metric climbing steadily upward with no signs of stopping. Furthermore, newly delinquent credit cards accounts just starting to fall behind had surged to around 9%, suggesting the pipeline of future serious delinquencies is already filled. And this concerning pattern connects directly to previous recessions. Consumer debt problems typically precede broader economic issues, and it's the first visible crack in the economic foundation before the walls start crumbling. Before people lose their jobs, they first struggle to pay their bills. They max out credit cards trying to maintain their lifestyle as inflation erodes their purchasing power. Only later do companies start laying off workers in response to decreased consumer spending. In essence, credit card problems function as an early warning system for the economy. And when consumers default on unsecured debt like credit cards, which carry the highest interest rates and are often the last bills people stop paying, it signals they've exhausted all other options. They've likely cut discretionary spending, depleted savings, and possibly borrowed from friends and family just to maintain their basic lifestyle. So the critical question remains, is this time truly different, or are we witnessing history repeat itself? Economic optimists point to strong employment numbers and wage growth, but our current situation bears striking resemblance to the early warning signs from 2007 before the Great Recession, when consumer debt problems mounted months before unemployment began rising. Now, the situation with non-prime borrowers is particularly alarming. FICO's data shows people with lower credit scores experiencing significantly higher rates of payment default, as well as increased debt accumulation. And the Philadelphia Federal Reserve reports that credit card balances more than 30 days past due have now more than doubled since the pandemic low, rising from 1.5% in mid-2021 to 3.5% in the third quarter of 2024. Meanwhile, revolving card balances have exploded to $645 billion, a 52.5% increase from mid-2021, with a total card balance at $914 billion, which is the highest since tracking began in 2012. And those massive balances you're seeing are just the tip of the iceberg. You see, what's truly frightening that's starting to happen is beneath the surface, where millions of Americans are barely keeping their heads above water financially, because the Philadelphia Fed also reported that accounts making only the minimum payments have hit a 12-year high of 10.75%. That's nearly 11% of credit card holders who can only afford the absolute bare minimum each month. And if you've ever been stuck in that minimum payment cycle, you'll know it's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the faster you sink. And the cold hard math of minimum payments is absolutely brutal. With the average credit card balance today reaching over $6,000, astronomical interest rates are averaging over 20%, making only minimum payments traps you in a debt cycle for over 220 months, which is over 18 years, before you'd finally break free. And during those 18 years, you'd pay an additional $9,000 just in interest, which is nearly 1.5 times what you originally borrowed. So if you put a $5,000 vacation on your credit card today and only make the minimum payments, you'd still be paying, when you're newborn graduates high school, having paid for it 3 times over. Now, this mathematical reality creates a financial prison from which escape becomes nearly impossible. You see, the debt follows you through life's milestones, limiting your choices and draining your resources that could have been allocated towards building wealth, and this financial burden eventually seeps into every aspect of your personal life, creating a cascade of negative effects. Now, the psychological toll of this debt stress is severe. When you're constantly worried about making minimum payments, it affects everything from your sleep to your relationships, and many people report they start feeling a sense of shame or failure, which only makes it harder to seek help or make the necessary changes to get their finances under control. And this constant financial anxiety feeds into broader economic behaviors. People spend less, they save less, and generally pull back in participating from the economy, which drives the economy further into recession. Now, what makes this situation even more alarming is that people are simultaneously taking on more debt. As inflation forces many households to rely on credit for everyday necessities like groceries and gas, the revolving door of debt keeps spinning faster. And I've talked with people who are using one credit card to make the minimum payment on another, creating a house of cards that eventually has to collapse. And unfortunately, we're already seeing the impact of this in consumer confidence numbers. The Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index has fallen 4 consecutive months, reaching its lowest level since January of 2021. Even more concerning is the Expectations Index, which reflects consumer short-term outlook. It plummeted to 65.2, which is the lowest reading in the past 12 years. And when that index falls below 80, it's historically been a reliable recession indicator since consumer spending drives over 2/3 of our nation's GDP. And unfortunately, the parallels to pre-2008 conditions are getting harder to ignore. Some metrics for certain demographics groups are already worse than they were during that period. The difference is that back then, the housing market was the primary trigger. Today, it's unsecured consumer debt that's flashing massive warning signals. Credit card balances and delinquency rates are climbing to concerning levels, especially when combined with auto loan delinquencies as well as student loan defaults. This situation is particularly precarious because it's happening despite a supposedly strong labor market. Unemployment remains relatively low, and millions of Americans can't keep up with their debts, which suggests the quality of available jobs may not match the cost of living that most people need to survive. People are working but still falling behind, and when jobs eventually start disappearing in a recession, these already stressed consumers will have no financial buffer left, and this creates an employment paradox, which we'll discuss shortly. But if you're enjoying this content so far and haven't already subscribed to the channel and hit the like button, it would mean the world to me if you did. If you find this content enjoyable, and it's much appreciated. Now, this employment paradox, where people work yet they're still falling behind, reveals something far more concerning about our economy as a whole. The truth is, America isn't experiencing one economy right now, but 2 completely different financial realities running in parallel. And when you see who's actually driving growth, you'll understand why we're more vulnerable to recession than the headlines might suggest. Let's be clear about what's happening. Households making roughly $153,000 annually are fueling most of our economic growth through their spending. Meanwhile, families bringing in $73,000 or less are increasingly turning to credit cards just to maintain their basic standard of living, despite those painful interest rates we talked about earlier. These are fundamentally different economic realities, as if 2 separate countries operate under the same flag, one thriving with abundant resources and the other struggling with mounting debt. And what makes this dangerous is how it creates a false sense of security. Overall consumer spending numbers might seem healthy, but it's primarily wealthy Americans keeping the economic engine running. Wells Fargo economists highlight something crucial. Upper income consumers are essentially masking the financial struggles that are happening at the lower end of the income spectrum. The financial struggles that are happening at the lower end of the income spectrum. And this observation matters because it exposes how traditional economic indicators fail to capture the growing fragility beneath surface level statistics. This concentration of spending power creates a precarious situation when assets that wealthy Americans depend on suddenly lose value. Things like stocks, real estate, and cryptocurrency. Affluent consumers get nervous and pull back on spending, potentially causing our entire economy to contract with surprising speed. And the savings data reinforces this divide as well. Lower and middle income households actually went into negative savings territory in early 2022, actively depleting emergency funds just to keep up with rising costs. Now, while savings rates have recovered somewhat, they remain well below pre-pandemic levels for these income groups. Comparing debt to income ratios, discretionary spending patterns, and financial stability between these groups reveals economic conditions as different as night and day. And this explains how we can simultaneously have rising delinquencies and strong consumer spending. Different income groups exist in fundamentally different economies. And warning signs are emerging that even the wealthy might be getting nervous, because GDP growth has slowed from 3.1% in Q3 to 2.4% in Q4 of 2024, and these GDP shifts directly reflect the spending dynamics of our bifurcated economy, because when wealthy consumers hesitate, the the impact ripples through all economic indicators. For the full year, growth came in at 2.8%, slightly lower than 2023's 2.9%, and the pullback in business investment is particularly telling. Companies reduced equipment investment by 8.7%, and they don't typically slash these expenditures when they're feeling optimistic. This cautious behavior stems directly from the concentration of economic power among higher earners, whose changing sentiment quickly affects business planning. And when we examine the economy's underlying strength, we still see relatively healthy 2.9% annual growth in Q4, but that continues a downward trend that should concern us. And another trend that you'll find concerning is how much of your personal information is available online and is being bought and sold by data brokers, which brings me to the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. Now, this is a service that I personally use, and they have removed my personal information from dozens of sites. Data breaches are becoming more common than ever, and this is why the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me, is more important than ever. It helps you remove your personal information, like your name, address, phone number, email, and more from data broker websites that buy, sell, and trade your data online. And the process is simple. You simply submit your information, and within 7 days, you'll receive a report showing exactly where your data was removed. Delete Me continues to monitor and remove your data all year long, and I can tell you from personal experience, it actually works. Now, you can get 20% off of all US plans today by heading over to the link in the description down below and join the thousands of people who trust Delete Me to protect their online privacy and take control of your data today. So what happens when wealthy Americans meaningfully reduce their spending? When that occurs, there won't be enough spending power from middle and lower income groups to sustain growth. They've already maxed out credit cards just to maintain their basic lifestyle, as well as depleting savings. So this two-tiered economy structure explains why traditional recession indicators might not work. The overall economy appears healthier than it actually is when its strength is concentrated amongst a small percentage of households, making our system unusually vulnerable to shocks affecting asset prices, the very thing that gives wealthy Americans the confidence to keep spending. And while big economic indicators might be misleading us, historically predicts downturns with surprising accuracy, and that's small business owners. You see, small business owners are the backbone of the American economy, and they are showing levels of uncertainty we haven't seen in decades. The National Federation of Independent Business Uncertainty Index just hit 104 in February, making its second highest reading since tracking began in 1973. When the people who employ nearly half of America's workforce, start getting nervous, history suggests we should pay attention. This spike in uncertainty coincides with rapidly evaporating small business optimism. The percentage of owners expecting economic improvement plummeted by 10 points in a single month, settling at negative 37%, which represents a rapid sentiment decline that typically precedes broader economic trouble. Now, these are calculated business decisions based on what entrepreneurs see on their own balance sheet and in their communities. And if you're an entrepreneur like myself, it's worth mentioning that you may enjoy some of the merch available that's featured on this channel, like this Capitalist Couture hoodie that I'm wearing right now, as well as my personal favorite, the Defund the IRS tank top, which makes for great workouts anytime you want to virtue signal to everyone at the gym how much you hate paying taxes. So if you're at all interested, there's a link in the description for more information. Now, back to the content. So imagine a small restaurant owner facing these challenges daily, reviewing supplier invoices with steadily climbing prices, scheduling fewer staff hours to manage rising labor costs, as well as postponing plans to expand into the vacant storefront next door. Each morning brings a new set of impossible choices between raising prices or watching profit margins vanish. And I've personally gone through this experience. And what's particularly concerning is the convergence of multiple challenges hitting all at once. Labor costs alone have jumped 3 points to 12%, sitting just 1 point below the all-time record set in December of 2021. And when staffing becomes your biggest financial headache, the natural response is to freeze hiring or plan for cuts. Simultaneously, trade policy uncertainty has become a major source of anxiety. According to KPMG chief economist Diane Swonk, the trade policy uncertainty index has soared to a record high, and current tariffs cover a much larger swath of goods, and these factors are creating what Diane Swonk describes as a stagflationary environment, higher prices with less hiring or no hiring, and this toxic mix erodes profit margins while forcing businesses to price-sensitive consumers. And small business owners can face an impossible choice. They either raise prices and lose customers, or absorb costs and watch their profits disappear. And chief economist at the NFIB, Bill Dunkelberg, highlighted how expansion plans are being shelved right now as small business owners are expecting better business conditions in the next 6 months, and the percent viewing the current period as a good time to expand also fell. And this pullback triggers a domino effect, reduced supplier orders, delayed equipment purchases, as well as overall more conservative spending, all rippling through the local economy. And the hiring freeze is especially worrisome because small businesses collectively employ more Americans than any other sector. Unlike corporate layoffs that that grab headlines, small business employment contraction happens thousands of times across America, and is less visible but ultimately more impactful on Main Street. And most troubling is how these warning signs are flashing while consumer spending, particularly among wealthy Americans, has remained relatively strong. You see, when the wealthy eventually pull back, small businesses will face both existing challenges plus a significant drop in customer demand. And that combination of record high uncertainty, plummeting optimism, rising labor costs, as well as trade policy chaos due to tariffs and other forms of uncertainty paints a very clear picture. Small business owners, with their fingers directly on the pulse of local economies, are sensing the trouble ahead, and these entrepreneurs aren't alarmists, but rather pragmatic risk takers who've survived previous downturns, and their collective preparation for economic trouble represents our most reliable early warning system, one we ignore at our own peril. So here's the truth. Recessions, they're like seasons. They come and they go, but you don't have to get caught in the storm unprepared. The economic warning signs might feel overwhelming, but they're your opportunity to strengthen your financial position. And the truth is, most fortunes are made during times of recession. So if you're feeling anxious, start by reviewing your monthly expenses and increasing your emergency fund to a full year of coverage. Consider weathering the storm by moving some investments towards value stocks or dividend payers that provide stability when markets get rough. And consider allocating a small portion of your portfolio to hedges like gold, in a position to have dry powder, aka cash, if we do see a dip in the stock market and enter a recession. Then you can always deploy the buy the dip strategy along the way to dollar cost average into better positions. And these are all things that I'm personally doing to weather the storm should we encounter a recession. So let me know what you're doing in the comment section below, and we will catch you on the next episode.